The medium-term budget policy statement, or also known as the MTBPS, was tabled at Parliament yesterday. This is a document which updates the budget, which is released in February of every year. What it does is it looks at the sources of revenue for government, where they're going to then spend that money, and if there is a difference between the revenue and the expenditure, how it is that we are going to cover that gap, particularly when your expenditure is higher than revenue. What we saw in the MTBPS yesterday was a revision downwards for overall revenue collection. We knew that the companies were going to see lower activity, given that there was lower demand for goods and services. And if you think about it, it's when interest rates are really high, you're then having to rejig your budget, and as a result, company income tax was going to fall. And we also knew that demand for commodities were going to fall, leading to lower prices. That said, the pace of decline has been a lot faster than expected, and so company income tax collections have already surprised to the downside so far this year and are expected to continue to do so. This means the government now has had to rejig its expectations for revenue lower. We've also seen an increase in VAT rebates, and that really is just given to businesses who pay VAT in the course of doing business, but because they're not the end user of the good or the service that they are providing, are able to claim that VAT that they've paid from government. And as a result, you've seen those being much higher. The reason those have been higher than had been expected is that the cost of doing business in South Africa has increased dramatically, with the high pace of load shedding leading to companies having to come up with some kind of energy supply alternative, as well as the inefficient rail services. We've seen that a lot of businesses have had to move their goods via road, which is a lot more expensive, a lot more less efficient. And so we've had these increased costs of doing business, and so the VAT rebates have been higher than expected. This has all been negative for revenue collection. One kind of bright shining light, though, and is worth bearing in mind, is the fact that revenue from personal income tax is higher. And this is in a large part due to the fact that the government wage bill was quite a bit higher than expected, given that we saw after the budget a higher than budgeted for increase in public services wage settlements for this year. This means ultimately that there is less money in the kitty to spend on. And given that South Africa's debt has already been projected to be over 70% of GDP for this year, government doesn't want to have that run away. As a result, it means that you have to then start adjusting expenditure. It gets very difficult to do so. Government provides a number of essential services, including education and healthcare, and security services to all people of the country. But at the same time, it is very well known that in South Africa there is a lot of irregular and unusual expenditure, be it corrupt or just money that has been spent in processes that should not have been undertaken. And so we are spending more than we need to, and we are not getting, as we like to say in economics, enough bang for our buck. And this is what the budget really came down to. We haven't been given a lot of detail as to how they plan on reining in expenditure, or at least getting more bang for buck. But what has been promised that come the 2024 budget, that the National Treasury and government altogether are embarking on a project to look at the different departments, what it is that they are meant to do, if they are achieving their purposes in providing services to the country, and how we can do it better. And so it does look that over the next couple of years going forward, we are probably facing some consolidation within government, but not to reduce what we are giving, but hopefully at the same time to actually provide better services while we are streamlining. That said, we do know that the base for government wages is now higher than before. Some of our departments, particularly healthcare, security, and education, are very labor heavy. And so to help cope with this higher than expected wage bill, the National Treasury has allocated some extra funds to those departments which need extra because they have such a high level of high number of people that are working for them. Other departments, though, are going to be expected to cover that higher wage bill by decreasing expenditure elsewhere within their budget. Looking forward, we also have the Special Relief of Distress Grant, which was implemented during COVID-19, being extended for another year. This means that for people who are of working age but unemployed, that they are now eligible to continue receiving this grant. It is the only grant that is available to them. And we know that government is looking at different ways of replacing it. As by removing it, you're actually taking a bunch of people who were already in a difficult situation, and let's be honest, at 350 Rand, remain in a fairly difficult situation, and putting them right back into kind of abject poverty. And so it really is about program design. How do we get the best outcome? Ultimately, it requires a lot of looking at what's been done in other countries, what kind of successes there have been, what the failures are. And so by extending the SRD grant one more year, they're giving themselves another year to investigate that, as well as dealing with potentially short-term issues that have arisen, such as Transnet, which are probably going to be looking to come to government for some financial help. Ultimately, it means that the deficit is wider than originally expected. The government is now expecting a deficit of 4.9% of GDP relative to 4.1% at the start of the year. And that means we need to somehow cover that wider gap. We have been told that they're not going to issue more bonds, at least not our fixed rate bonds. And we believe that there are some other sources of funding that the government can use to cover the shortfall, at least for the current financial year. Ultimately, what is happening is that with these deficits from one year to the next, we're adding to our debt pile, how much we owe not only South Africans but also foreigners who lend to us. The government has revised the debt to GDP ratio to 77.7%, almost 78%, as where it's going to stabilize in the future. We do believe that there is a significant risk that this might not happen, and that debt could actually continue to increase. The problem is that if we are not able to stabilize our debt through reining in expenditure and getting better efficiency, we are going to continue paying more and more interest for that debt that we are borrowing. And this is something that is becoming a major issue and was highlighted in the MTBPS, in that our interest bill is basically for every 5 Rand of tax revenue that the government is getting, 1 Rand of that goes to just interest payments. Finally, what is really important is that government services and government efficiency is incredibly important for overall growth of the economy. The government borrows at the lowest possible rate of interest that South Africans can borrow at. It is seen as the risk-free rate. Effectively, the reason being that if a government is not able to cover money that is owed, it could technically go and print money to pay what is owed. Let's just pause there and remember that printing money is not a good idea. There are a number of countries which have tried to do this in the past, and it just comes out to very bad inflationary and economic outcomes. So this is a very bad choice outcome. As a result, but because of this situation, governments get the lowest rate of increase. But because we are borrowing at such an increasing rate, what's happening is that we are seen as a riskier country to lend to, and as a result, our sovereign risk premium, the premium that is put on kind of what is seen as a risk-free rate, is rising. And that means that private sector companies are now having to borrow at a higher risk premium, sovereign risk premium, and then are seen to be more risky than government, so are then also getting a higher interest rate. So this then is bad for investment, because if you want to invest in a company and you're borrowing money, you're having to pay a very high interest rate. This discourages investment. Also, government is an incredibly important has an incredibly important role to play in ensuring that the infrastructure works, that our rail services are reliable, that your electricity is reliable, that municipalities provide the services they are meant to. This includes electricity, it includes water services, that regulation is set up in such a way that private sector can come in and create jobs. The most important to reduce the demand on our social wage is ultimately to have job creation. And to do that, government needs to do its job too.